imagine reading two completely different sentences in two completely different languages at the exact same time. And while you're doing that, you're also moving your hands at a synchronized 270 beats per minute.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's intense.
Right. It sounds like some sort of, I don't know, cognitive load test site for fighter pilots or something.
Honestly, it practically is.
Yeah, but it's not. That is actually the baseline entry requirement for a 15-year-old trying to secure a first chair position in Atlanta's elite youth classical music pipeline.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. So for you listening today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly how that happens. We're looking at a stack of sources, internal season schedules, website archives, raw sheet music from audition packets, and even some YouTube concert logs.
Right. A really great mix of like the theory and the actual execution.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack the Metropolitan Youth Symphony Orchestras of Atlanta, which most people just call MYSO.
Wow.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
It's a fascinating data set because, we often look at high-level performance and we only see the polished final product. Like you see teenagers playing these incredibly complex symphonies and you just assume, oh, it's simply raw talent.
Right, they're just prodigies.
Exactly. But the materials we are diving into today offer this really rare structural look at the specific mechanisms of their pedagogy. We are essentially mapping out how a regional arts organization takes a child with like basic instrumental proficiency and biologically, neurologically trains them to function at a collegiate level of musical execution.
Well, let's start with the infrastructure, because calling MYSO an after-school music club is frankly just fundamentally inaccurate.
Oh, absolutely. That doesn't even come close.
Right. I mean, they're heading into their 37th season in Atlanta, supported by grant funding from the City of Atlanta Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs. And looking through their program literature, the weekly orchestra rehearsal is, it's really only one piece of a much larger apparatus.
Yeah, they have a whole ecosystem going on.
They do. They mandate chamber music ensemble training, targeted sectional coaching, and they even offer specific scholarship awards for continued private study. I kind of think about it like an athletic farm system or a minor leaguer, but instead of throwing fastballs, these kids are conquering Dvorak and Tchaikovsky.
That's a great analogy. And the chamber music component is really the critical differentiator here because in a standard orchestra of, say, 80 people, a student relies entirely on the conductor.
Right, the person at the front waving the baton.
Exactly. The conductor is the central processor. They dictate the tempo, the volume, the phrasing. The musician is basically just executing instructions. But when MYSO breaks these students down into small chamber ensembles, like a string quartet, for instance, they completely remove that central processor.
Right, there's nobody at the front telling them what to do. I was actually thinking about this like a mesh network in computing.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like instead of every device pinging a central router, which in this case is the conductor, every node in the network has to constantly transmit and receive data from all the other nodes simultaneously just to keep the network from crashing.
That is the exact mechanism at play. In a chamber setting, these students have to actively monitor the micro timing of the person sitting across from them.
Wow.
Yeah, they have to read the physical tension in a cellist's shoulder to anticipate a fractional delay in a downbeat and then instantly adjust their own bowing speed to match it. It's teaching this really intense nonverbal high-speed collaboration.
So they're learning to share a singular internal pulse rather than relying on an external visual cue.
Precisely.
Which is just a huge cognitive demand for a teenager who is also navigating high school algebra on a Tuesday.
Yeah, the mental load is staggering.
But MYSO doesn't throw them into the deep end immediately, right?
Yeah.
The ecosystem is heavily structured into three distinct tiers. You have the Sinfonietta, the Philharmonia, and the Symphony.
Yeah. Right, and that tiered system is essentially a filtering and homogenizing mechanism. The Sinfonietta is the entry point, designed primarily for the youngest string players.
Okay, so that's where they start building the foundation.
Exactly. At that level, the pedagogy is entirely about standardizing the hardware, so to speak. They are teaching a dozen different kids who all have different private teachers how to move their bows in the exact same direction with the exact same weight at the very same time.
Got it. And then you hit the Philharmonia tier, which the archives note is comprised of late middle school to early high school students.
Right, a slight step up in age and skill.
Yeah, and the internal documentation specifically refers to this as their challenging skill development phase. This is the bridge where the harmonic complexity really ramps up, forcing the students to hold their independent parts against conflicting melodies.
Because they are building the necessary structural integrity for the top tier. The symphony tier operates under the explicit expectation of collegiate-level musicianship.
Which is high schoolers playing at a college level.
Exactly. They are programming heavy, historically unforgiving repertoire, Beethoven, Dvorak, Tchaikovsky. You literally cannot survive in that ensemble if you are still actively thinking about the mechanics of your instrument.
Oh, I see. So the instrument just has to be an extension of your body by that point.
It has to be, because your cognitive bandwidth is entirely consumed by interpreting the literature.
That makes total sense. But to even get into that room, there's a severe barrier to entry. For this upcoming 2026-2027 season, students have to submit highly selective video auditions, and the deadline for those is between June 5th and June 10th, 2026.
The gauntlet, basically.
Yeah, total gauntlet. And we actually pulled the violin I sheet music excerpt required for that symphony tier. It's from Mikhail Glinka's Ruslan and Ludmilla Overture.
Oh boy, that piece.
Yeah, I spent like an hour looking at this PDF yesterday, and honestly, the math on this page does not make sense to me.
It's intimidating just to look at. Seriously. The tempo marking is presto, and it dictates a half note at 135 beats per minute. I tried physically tapping that out on my desk, which translates to a quarter note at 270 beats per minute, and my hand literally cramped up.
Right, it's borderline absurd.
So how is a high schooler executing a stringed instrument at that velocity without everything just falling apart into total noise? Is that even a realistic expectation?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the physical mechanics required to execute Glinka at that tempo are extreme. At 270 quarter note beats per minute, you are dealing with relentless streams of eighth notes.
Just a wall of sound.
Basically. And the primary challenge isn't just moving your left hand fast enough on the fingerboard, it's the physics of the right arm.
Wait, the bowing arm?
Yes, the string crossings at that speed require hyper-efficient, millimeter-precise movements of the wrist. If the player uses too much arm weight, the bow gets stuck in the string and the tempo drags. But if they use too little weight, the tone becomes purely surface noise. Wow. And the dynamic markings layered over that tempo are just aggressive. Like looking at the sheet music, it drops down to pianissimo, which is super quiet, and then immediately demands a sforzando accent on isolated eighth notes.
It's brutal.
Doing that at 135 half-note beats per minute feels like trying to parallel park a car going 90 miles an hour.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
Right.
Because it fundamentally alters how you distribute bow weight. To hit a sudden sforzando at that speed, the student has to instantly apply intense downward pressure with their index finger on the bow, grab the string, release the sound, and then instantly remove the pressure so the subsequent notes don't get crushed.
All in the fraction of a second?
Right. And they have to do this while their brain is operating on a 2 to 3 measure delay.
Wait, what do you mean a delay? Like a lag?
I mean a cognitive buffer. When a musician is reading music at that velocity, their eyes cannot be looking at the notes their hands are currently playing. If you look at the note you are playing right now, you will crash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their eyes are actually scanning the sheet music 2, sometimes 3 measures ahead. They're feeding the architectural data to the motor cortex, which then stores it in a temporary buffer before sending the execution signal to the hands.
That is incredible.
It is. And MYSO chooses this specific Glinka excerpt because it tests that exact buffer capacity. If the buffer is too small, the student gets overwhelmed and the tempo just collapses.
So the audition is like less about musicality and more about raw data processing under pressure.
I mean, it's both. But you cannot access the musicality if the processing speed just isn't there.
Man. So let's look at the reality of what happens if they actually pass that test. I'm looking at the 2026-2027 season schedule, and I have to push back a bit on the sheer intensity of this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. These rehearsals are mandatory, taking place every Sunday afternoon at Drew Charter School. The Sinfonietta kids are there from 1:45 p.m. to 2:45 p.m.
Which isn't too bad.
No, an hour is fine.
Sure.
But the Philharmonia and Symphony students show up at 3:00 p.m. and rehearse well past 5:00 p.m. And this runs relentlessly from mid-September all the way to May, with only the bare minimum breaks for Thanksgiving, winter, spring, and Easter holidays.
It's a marathon.
It is, and these are high schoolers. They have SAT prep, AP classes, sports, college applications. Is there a point where an organizational pipeline like this ceases to be developmental and just becomes like a burnout factory?
It's a very valid concern, and, it's a tension inherent in any elite youth endeavor, whether it's classical music, Olympic gymnastics, or competitive debate.
Right.
However, the structure of the specific schedule indicates they are deliberately training endurance. The modern professional orchestral environment demands the ability to sit in a chair for 3 hours, maintain hyperfocus, and perform flawlessly under hot lights.
So it's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. By programming these intense Sunday blocks, MYSO is acclimating the students' nervous systems to sustained output. It's pure conditioning.
And the end goals of that conditioning are 3 major concert cycles. They're hitting the GT Ferst Center for the Arts on November 8th and February 28th, and then culminating at the Rialto Center for the Arts on May 2nd.
Big stages.
Very big stages.
Yeah.
But what stood out to me in the schedule aren't just the concert dates themselves, it's the specific personnel they are bringing in throughout the year to get the students ready for those stages.
You're talking about desk collaborations.
Yes, the rotation is extensive. They have a guest clinician, LaBrie, scheduled for October 18th. They bring in Alan Fowler, who is a guest conductor, and they even scheduled a dedicated Saturday rehearsal on May 1st with the Project Trio.
Right.
But the one that really anchors the philosophy for me is January 31st, when composer Michael Duff is scheduled to come in as a guest conductor.
That is a huge deal. Bringing in a living composer fundamentally shifts a student's relationship to the material. Well, when you spend your formative years playing Beethoven and Mozart, music is inherently archival. It's a historical artifact that you are trying to accurately replicate. The ink on the page is dead and immutable.
Right, you're treating the sheet music like a museum piece behind glass.
Exactly. But when someone like Michael Duff steps onto the podium to conduct a piece he literally wrote, the dynamic entirely changes. The music becomes a living, malleable language.
Oh, I see.
He might tell the cello section, actually, I wrote this phrase marked forte, but in this specific acoustic space, let's pull it back to mezzo piano so the oboe can cut through.
So the students realize that the sheet music isn't a sacred text. It's a set of instructions for a human conversation.
Precisely. And working with different clinicians like LaBrie forces them to constantly decode new leadership styles, too.
Because if you spend 3 years only looking at one primary conductor, you become entirely reliant on their specific physical vocabulary. Like, you know exactly what their left eyebrow twitch means for a crescendo.
Which is actually a liability in a professional setting. Professional musicians often work with a different guest conductor every single week. Learning to instantly read the micro-expressions, the baton technique, and the verbal priorities of a completely new leader, and then instantly adapt your playing to their demands, is a highly transferable survival skill.
That makes total sense. So we have the theory, we have the schedule, the filtering mechanism, the cognitive buffering. Let's look at the actual output.
Let's do it.
To see the culmination of this pipeline, we dug into the YouTube archives provided by Lux Studio Events and analyzed the Cycle 3 concert from May 3rd, 2026. This gives us a direct view of the educational scaffolding happening in real time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it acts as a literal auditory map of the pedagogy we've been discussing. You can trace a developmental arc clearly from the first group all the way to the last.
So let's trace it. The Sinfonietta opened the concert. They played Catherine Griesinger's Castle Quest and a piece called Finding Figaro, which is an arrangement of Mozart. On the surface, it's, accessible foundational music. But listening to the performance through the lens of what we know about their training now, Finding Figaro isn't just programmed because it sounds pleasant.
Oh no, definitely not. It's an exercise in strict mathematical subdivision. Mozart's music, especially simplified arrangements for younger players, relies on rigid metric counting. There is very little rhythmic ambiguity there. The 10-year-olds in that section are being forced to internally subdivide the beat. If one violin rushes a quarter note by even a fraction of a second, the structural math of the piece falls apart entirely. It teaches discipline of the internal metronome.
Got it. Then the Philharmonia took the stage, and the complexity immediately escalated. They actually separated the ensemble, featuring the strings and then the winds separately.
That's a bold move.
Yeah, they played works like Solaris, Champions Fanfare, and Black Watch March. The choice to separate the winds from the strings is a massive developmental leap, isn't it?
Huge. In the entry-level ensembles, wind players often have their parts doubled by the strings, which provides a massive safety net for pitch and rhythm. By physically separating them, you just completely remove the net.
Wow.
Yeah, a high school clarinetist playing the Black Watch March has to maintain absolute harmonic independence.
Wow.
They are forced to actively listen to the brass section to tune their individual notes in real time because there is no blanket of string sound to hide behind anymore. It's exposing and it forces rapid technical growth.
That sounds terrifying, honestly. And then the symphony ensemble closes the concert. The leap from Philharmonia to symphony is just staggering. They opened with a massive 16-minute performance of Beethoven's Leonore No. 3 Overture.
Right, and demanding 16 minutes of uninterrupted, high-stakes focus from a high schooler is a testament to the endurance conditioning we discussed regarding those Sunday schedules.
Yeah, the mental stamina required to not drop concentration in minute 14 of a Beethoven overture is immense. But the Beethoven wasn't even the peak of the cognitive load. They performed the world premiere of a piece called Into Transparency by the contemporary composer Yukiko Nishimura.
A world premiere.
A world premiere. And they performed this side by side with the collegiate musicians of the Georgia State University Symphony Orchestra. They also featured one of their own students, Charlotte Rogers, as the soloist on Chaminade's concertino for flute and orchestra.
The Nishimura premiere is really the ultimate culmination of the ecosystem's design. Think about the causality here. The 10-year-old in Sinfonietta, who was forced to learn rigid metric counting while playing Finding Figaro, relies entirely on that neurological foundation 6 years later when they are in the symphony tier. Contemporary works like Nishimura's frequently utilize complex, shifting time signatures and dissonant harmonic structures. You cannot navigate that architecture without a flawless internal metronome.
And playing it side by side with collegiate adults fundamentally alters the baseline expectation, too.
Yeah.
Like a high school violist sitting next to a 21-year-old university music major will unconsciously elevate their own playing to match the tone, the intensity, and the professionalism of the person sharing their music stand.
Exactly. It's environmental osmosis. And it proves the efficacy of the pipeline. When you set the environmental standard at a collegiate level and you provide the rigorous, unyielding scaffolding to support it, the weekly sectionals, the chamber groups, the brutal audition requirements, the students just naturally recalibrate their own understanding of what they are capable of.
It makes the entire operation feel less like a traditional youth orchestra and much more like an incubator for elite cognitive processing.
That's a great way to put it.
So, for you listening who are invested in how young talent is cultivated, tracking MYSO's upcoming 2026-2027 season is highly recommended. The concerts at the Ferst Center in November and February will be the next public output of this massive, unseen machine.
And, looking at the sheer technical demands of pieces like that Glinka audition and the complex reality of premiering Nishimura's works at 16 years old, it leaves us with a pretty compelling final thought.
What's that?
Well, for decades, pedagogical experts have assumed there's a biological and cognitive ceiling to human technical capability on an instrument. But if this extreme velocity of data processing is the baseline requirement for a teenager today, we really have to ask, are the youth in these elite pipelines continuously redefining the physical limits of what is musically possible?
Wow. It really suggests the standard for mastery isn't fixed at all, does it? It's a moving target that gets pushed further out with every new generation that enters the crucible.
Exactly.
Definitely something for you to consider the next time you see a teenager effortlessly navigate a piece of music that was once considered completely unplayable. Keep digging, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.